Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Double Feature Podcast, where every week me and David bring two films together. Looking for the best marathon, best way to kill a weekend? We're looking for the best double feature. David, how are you?
I'm feeling pretty good, Dean. Like we talked about a little bit for the show, we both went to our first in-person movie theater experiences this week, so it's got me feeling in the mood for movies, you know what I mean? You make some popcorn, you get a sody pop, you sit down in a dark room, and you just space out for 2 hours and wonder where you are at the end.
The best kind of movie-going experience. The best kind. And, and we have two movies here for our cartoon June month theme thing that may have benefited from seeing in a movie theater. At least one of them would have benefited from seeing in a movie theater, and the other one should never have been seen. But there we go. Well, I guess to give everybody the pretext here, so for the month of June, we have gone through and looked at a couple of cartoon films or animated films. We have looked at our personal favorites coming out of Warner Brothers during the late 90s. We've looked at the two Disney films that kind of revolutionized the industry, Snow White and Toy Story. And now we're looking at animated films that bleed into reality. These are the animated films that work as cartoons, and there's live action actors kind of melding together. And David, what did we decide to subject ourselves to this week?
Well, there's an obvious pick here that I think everybody already is thinking about when we think about live action blended with cartoon animation. But there's also as I saw on a headline article that I Googled, an odd cousin to this film. These two films being Who Framed Roger Rabbit, as well as Cool World, which has been just a delight.
Yeah, I messaged you after I watched Cool World, because I watched the movies maybe, I don't know, a couple hours or a day before you do, and I watched it, and I messaged you like, don't watch Cool World, we'll find another film. And your response back to me was, I just finished. I'm so sorry. Cool World was a rough watch, but Who Framed Roger Rabbit was actually like kind of awesome.
Yeah,
right? Was that just me?
You know, Cool World for me was just, like I keep saying to Dean, you know, on top of the fact that it has Brad Pitt in it, so I'm gonna enjoy it no matter what happens on screen. They could have him literally skinning a live animal while watching grass grow, and I would pay 2 tickets to see it just so I could bring a friend. But aside from that, I mean, it's a wacky creation that, might suffer from a little bit of obsession, maybe. But, you know, you get a lot out of it. And then, yes, opposite of that, Who Framed Roger Rabbit is always the quite wild ride that it has become over the years, sprouting from a lot of people's childhoods.
Yeah. And, okay, I don't know about you, but Who Framed Roger Rabbit is one of those like films that is basically like everybody watches. I think that's one of those childhood movies that most people of our age group have seen or are at least aware of.
Yeah.
And Cool World is a movie that I literally asked like 4 people, like, have you ever heard of this movie? And not a one. Like, I think Cool World may have just disappeared from like public consciousness. And it wasn't like and these weren't like small movies. Granted, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, I'm pretty sure it was released by Touchstone, and I think Disney owns Touchstone, I think.
Yeah.
Am I crazy? Is that a thing?
I think the story, because it's directed by Robert Zemeckis, who we love on this show.
Yes.
I think the story goes...
He gave us Back to the Future.
Yeah. The story goes that Zemeckis was trying to get this done with Disney for years. But it just turned out that, I think Touchstone is like one of those, like, they send this to the smaller house kind of pictures, expecting not much to come from it, and then it ended up being, you know, kind of a big hit.
Huge.
I'm not well versed in the story necessarily, but I knew that I did know that there were some problems with getting it made. It was one of the first picks on their roster. But, you know, I mean, you give this movie like $50 million, I think was the budget. It's like, I think they expected something to come out of it.
I think it was taken up to 70, and this was $70 million in 1988 money.
Yeah.
Money, like, meant something back then. And then, like, you know, a couple years later, we got Cool World, and this was... Okay, I think I want to just talk about Cool World really badly, because, don't get me wrong, Who Framed Roger Rabbit is a huge technical achievement. It's a huge, like... It's actually, like, a huge homage to, like, classic noir stories. It's a good comedy. It's overall a pretty decent film, but the backstory of it is Robert Zemeckis wanted to get it made, and it took him a long time, and then he finally got to make it, and it was really cool. But Cool World is a Mr. Toad's wild ride of insanity to get this fucker made. All right?
Yeah, especially coming from Ralph Bakshi. I mean, that guy probably struggled and drug his feet through every project that he ever tried to get made. Especially when one of his most famous things is one of the most offensive cartoons to ever come from anybody. But it's also one of, ironically, the most famous cartoons to ever come from anybody, so go figure.
Yep. I guess we got to give people a little bit of a preamble for Ralph Bakshi, right? Or Bakshi? How do you pronounce his last name?
Bakshi. Yeah, Ralph Bakshi. I know. For some reason, I'm always like Ralph Backscree. I don't know. It's an odd last name. It's not one of the more common ones.
Yeah, but we have to really give people a preamble for him, right? Because there's probably only like 2 films people would even vaguely know that he made. One of them is Fritz the Cat, and the other one is the original animated Lord of the Rings film, or the Hobbit film. Yeah. Because he only did one of them.
It was the Hobbit, yeah.
Yeah. Which I own on VHS. More you know. But yeah, those are the only 2, like, quote-unquote mainstream films he ever made other than this.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. It is Lord of the Rings from 1978. What didn't you know?
See? I know things now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so... And David, how would you describe his modus operandi, his style, what his movies are about?
Well, it's certainly more of his more personal movies, because he's made certain things that aren't more personal things. But a lot of them, for some reason, have an obsession with kind of urban settings, civil unrest. We'll call it inappropriate subjects, because I say that more of as a broad umbrella than a censored label, because there's a lot that goes under that umbrella.
Yeah. To give the trigger warning, I've seen very few, like, of his films outside of the Lord of the Rings and all that. But I mean, I've watched Fritz the Cat once, and I've seen a couple other things about his stuff. And he's really big on talking about racism.
Yeah.
And showing very blatant depictions of, like, racist caricatures. Rape, drug use, civil unrest in terms of, like, rioting and wanton murder. Like, I would describe him as, like, a provocateur, right? Like, his goal is to, like, provoke people with these really animated cartoons about really, really real-life subject matter.
Yeah, so I think there's kind of a reason for all this backstory and why he becomes this way, in that when you grow up, or not so much grow up, but kind of come into your own as a young man in 1970s New York, filth and smut are just kind of what's around you. And
it's just what you do.
Yeah, and I mean, the 70s in New York there's a reason that it became a concrete jungle. And I feel like a part of it is just Bakshi kind of reflecting on what he saw around him, as well as, becoming a provocateur of those things, because it's probably quite frustrating to deal with that setting. But, at the end of the day, it is still, to anybody who's not from that setting or isn't familiar, even in the slightest, it's quite alarming, almost, what he ends up coming out with. Even though, again, like we keep saying, this guy goes on to be a very influential filmmaker, both in animation and beyond, and kind of provocateur media, like you said.
Yes, and then I guess he develops enough clout and whatnot to finally get to make Cool World. And this was not a small movie by any means. It's getting like produced by Paramount Pictures. I think it had a $40 million budget, something like that. Like, probably not super big, but in 92. And he basically only gets to make this because of Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Yeah.
Which is why this is the pairing, because Cool World, as stated by basically anyone I could find who was involved with the production, blatantly said after Who Framed Roger Rabbit came out, they greenlit this movie because, oh, this can work. But they changed literally everything about the story to get it made. And yeah, that's kind of the preamble, I guess. Both these movies probably had production hells to go through. And a lot of weird shit. But
a lot of weird shit.
I don't know.
Yeah.
A lot of weird shit. David, is there anything else you want to get off on this preamble before we go into our log lines?
I mean, at the end of the day, I think the weirdest and most interesting thing about both these films is that both of them end up being noir films, and both of them end up being, I mean, really quite similar, aside from everything else. The genre is one thing, but you would still have a guy who's not comfortable in the toon world, who then has to solve something in order to become comfortable with the toon world, and then find some salvation as he joins the toon world. It's like eerily similar. I don't know if you have anything on that, but we can kind of get into that once we dig into both of these.
I mean, I will say that these two have a very similar thematic compass they're running with, but I think the execution
is
the real difference maker here.
Right.
And I think with that mysterious phrasing, let's get into the log line so we can talk about these flicks.
Certainly. Okay, your log lines for this week. Cool World is about a fresh off the plane GI that gets the cane from the real world while on death's doorstep and falls headfirst into a cartoon dimension created by a famous comic artist left to stop his most prized creation from tearing the walls down between reality and animosity. Who Framed Roger Rabbit is about a drunkard detective that is hired by the biggest studio exec in town to solve the mystery of an adultery and murder plot that leaves Toontown's biggest star as the prime suspect.
Well, David, where do you want to start? The one that is probably the better movie, or the one that's probably more weird to analyze?
Well, I think you did say that you wanted to dig into Cool World, and I am for it, because I'm not gonna go on a limb and say that this is the better movie, because it isn't. But did I find myself enjoying this one more because of what it was doing? For some reason.
I don't even know how to respond to that, because this movie makes no goddamn sense.
Of course not.
No, and it's not even okay. On my other podcast, the Film Club podcast that I do with my girlfriend, she constantly gets angry at me that I suggest to her art house films, right? I made her watch Eraserhead, for God's sakes.
Right.
And her thing is Dean, you only like these pretentious movies that make no sense. And I'm like, no, I like pretentious movies that make sense, but only to the fucking world the movie's going on with. This movie doesn't make sense even within the context of the world. Because, David, you know how you said that Brad Pitt ended up into Cool World, which is the design of a comic book creator?
Yeah.
That's actually incorrect. Cool World exists with or without Mr. Jack Deebs.
Yeah, but I think you misunderstand, Dean, that when you said that this film doesn't make sense, that's pretty tough to put into one sentence, because you go back and forth with how deep and convoluted the lore of this world is. So I'll give you one thing that, yes, it's technically incorrect, but everything about this is incorrect. I mean...
Oh, yeah.
Where could we begin? I think it's interesting you point out this in your discussion of the process you go through on the film club, where your girlfriend doesn't quite understand that some films are allowed to not make sense, or they just don't make perfect sense. They don't all follow the hero's journey, per se. And that's fine. You get some great films that way. Now, this is one of those films that doesn't make sense because it does everything wrong.
Everything wrong. Like, okay.
While by the way, the caveat I think that is important to point out is that it does everything wrong while thinking it's doing it right. I should say that.
Yeah, because don't get me wrong, it's doing everything piss poorly. Like, nothing makes sense. The story's really all over the place. The actors feel like they have been given zero directions and are reading cue cards. The production design is all over the place in terms of quality. And the camera work is shoddy at best. But oh my god, these guys go hard as a motherfucker into the bad. All into it. But okay, David, where the fuck do we get started?
Well,
do you want to just get started at the beginning and work our way through the plot here?
Yeah.
Do you want to just talk about specific aspects?
Let's spend 5-10 minutes and run down the plot here, because I think that's Exhibit A against the case of this movie. Because I do agree too that there's certain things about the production that fascinated me. There are things that should work about this movie that were totally interesting when I was getting ready for it, that they just fumbled the ball on. And then there is the story, which is fascinating in itself. Now, let's start at the beginning of the movie. We open with a really sudden opening of Brad Pitt coming off the plane, assumedly after returning home from service. They live in some desert town out in the middle of nowhere.
They live right outside of Las Vegas. I think the context is this is post World War II. He's a returning Marine, and he's gonna take his mom out on the town with his brand new motorcycle he got in Germany or something.
Yeah, I think he won it in a card game is the thing, and dinner's on, but that apparently doesn't matter. The house will burn down. So they go on a 45-minute motorcycle ride. Not in the movie, but logic-wise, based on how far it seems like they've traveled. They've been gone for an hour.
Maybe. Because they go from relatively okay, this is kind of a lone farmhouse in the middle of the fucking desert, but you can see there's other stuff around, to empty desert. There's not a damn thing in eyesight anywhere. So they're out for a good bit, and then they get hit by the drunkest of drunk drivers, which kills Brad Pitt's mom, and then Brad Pitt suddenly has a PTSD war flashback after getting thrown 40 yards from the motorcycle. And then the ambulance appears, and as he's about to die, he gets sucked into the cartoon world, into Cool World. Why did he get sucked into Cool World?
Well, so this is, I guess, Exhibit A of where I think there are interesting things going on here that are just executed extremely poorly. Because I love the idea of... I first love the idea of there being a mad scientist being I'm going to see if we can cross dimensions, and that other dimension just happens to be the Toon World, the Cool World that we're going into in the movie. That's interesting in itself. It's also interesting that first person would happen to be somebody on death's doorstep, and this is kind of their second chance, their new lease on life.
Yeah.
It's good.
And the person who's getting sucked in is somebody who we've now seen has some sort of PTSD. He has some sort of psychological break. He's lost somebody. There's an interesting character setup here.
Yeah, exactly. There's character setup. There's there's backstory, there's setting up the world, there's an inciting incident even. There's even, I think, once he gets into Toon World, an interesting animation sequence in which he walks into the darkness holding the doctor's hand. But there's also an urban ambulance that shows up within minutes of a crash in the middle of a desert. There's the crazy coincidence of a drunk driver just happening to hit them, even though they would have had to see each other coming for miles because there's nothing around them. There's this odd Oedipal relationship going on with Brad Pitt and his mom that I picked up on this because I'm like, why are you taking your mom out for a 45-minute motorcycle ride and trying to like impress her almost? It seemed weird. It was borderline so weird.
I'll give you that. I was like, because at first I thought, oh, this is going to be like a sweet, like, hey mom, I'm home. I got this motorcycle. Come with me. It's like, I thought it was going to be like, oh, a sweet, like, bonding thing. Like, hey mom, I'm home. You know, I'm safe, whatever. But then it's like really awkward how the whole like lead up and conversation went. Because it feels like he's hitting on his mom.
Yeah.
Right? And it might be a thing where it's like, you know, my family's past, like how my dad introduced himself to my mother was, hey babe, I got a motorcycle, want to go on a ride? And I'm like, I can't like separate that. That might be a thing. Also, my mom was a classy lady and shot him down, by the way. Just letting you know. Unlike Brad Pitt's mom, who did not shoot him down.
Yeah, I do feel like Brad Pitt would have found a way to like, I don't know. It very much seemed like the mom didn't want to go. That's neither here nor there. It would have made a lot more.
A weird moment.
We're going to leave it at. It would have made a lot more sense for that just to have been his wife or something, because of. By the way, what happens throughout the rest of the story, which revolves around a love plot, which I mean that's neither here nor there. So there's a weird setup, but then beyond that, we get an even weirder kind of. How would I put this? Cool World.
It's the second setup.
Yeah, that's true. And I'll put this out there: the set design of Cool World, I think, was pretty good for what they were going for. Was it the best execution? No, probably not. But do I love that sort of grimy, very expansive? That's one thing I really loved, is how the depth of what I saw on screen whenever they were in a setting on Cool World just looked like it went on for eons, and it was quite interesting to me.
Oh yeah, like the pure cartoon sequences are fascinating to watch because they're highly detailed, but they all look like they're kind of like that early Disney animation or like Looney Tunes animation, and it seems like they're all these weird angles and shapes, and it's incredibly visually interesting to look at. But then like Brad Pitt's there, and suddenly the car goes from a cartoon car to a real three-dimensional car, and then goes from a real actual car to being a cardboard cutout of a car.
Yeah.
Or when he goes up to a door, and the door goes from being a cartoon door until he has to interact with it, and then it turns into a matte painting, but not a good matte painting, like a really bad matte painting. And it's like, that's the stuff about the production design that I was getting on.
You're right.
Where some things are purely cartoon, and then some things are like real three-dimensional objects, and then sometimes they're not. They're just like Pee-wee's Playhouse.
And you know what's funny about this, right? They totally have the ability to go all the way, because they do in certain instances. There's certain instances where Brad Pitt just blatantly beats up on cartoons, and it's pretty decent. But for some reason, it was outside of what did you say it was, a $40 million budget for them to animate. By the way, animation, which probably wouldn't have cost them as much as building a car. That would have been, I don't know.
Well, okay, the budget for this estimated, so, you know, is about $30 million. All right, and a $30 million picture in 1992 is good enough, right? That's
$30 million
that's like
today is good enough.
Yeah, that's a lower budget like feature film, right? Like that is well within like the financial means of this.
Yeah, you can get it done.
Yeah. And this is before Brad Pitt was like A-list movie star. So it's not like, oh, they blew all their money on the actor's like salary.
Yeah, they this is like a jackpot. This is a hole in one. He was doing Sunny D commercials. Like this should have been the thing that put Ralph Bakshi on the map. He should have gotten more than just Lord of the Rings after this. I mean,
yeah. I'm honestly, I'm looking at because at first I was like, maybe all the money went to like the actor's salary because some of the movie looks really cheap, and I was like, why the fuck does it look so cheap? And I was looking, I'm like, maybe it's Kim Basinger, like maybe she asked for a lot of money, and then I found out that no, she did this movie for scale because she wanted to use it to show sick kids in hospitals. Right?
Not that kind of movie.
Now, this is where I get to the big thing, okay? So, this movie originally had a completely different plot that got changed.
Okay, so that's interesting. Before we get into that plot,
we should probably finish this one.
Well, I feel like from here on out, let's do a quick rundown, because I think there was some confusion between you and I on how exactly this plot is supposed to go down. So I'll give you my rundown of the plot. And then let's check that with your rundown of the plot to see what the hell we watched here. So
okay, I'll try not to interrupt you because I need to know what you saw. I don't think we saw the same movie.
Yeah, I'll make it brief. What I got was that we have a detective. I don't even remember what his fucking name is. Detective Brad Pitt. Yeah. He, like we said, kind of dies and then is transported into Cool World, where for some reason that, without any explanation, prompts him to become one of the head detective constables, I guess is what it more seems like, because there's not really a mystery going on here, for the Cool World Police Department. Or he's like a private... I don't know. It doesn't matter. Anyways, then like we go from 1940 to 1990, where there's a guy who's been drawing this comic book named Cool World, but also specifically this girl Hollywood, who's his, I don't know, weird sexual fantasy boiled down into a sketch. And basically Jack Teebs, this famous comic book writer, gets out of prison after serving a sentence for murdering his wife, and is experiencing these like weird flashes between realities because Hollywood's trying to get him into the Toon World, where it's apparently against the law that you can't be a Toon having sex with a human, even though I don't really understand. That doesn't neither here nor there. They never explain it.
We're going to get into the weird sex shit. Don't worry.
Yeah, well, and frankly, actually, this is something I noticed. They don't really explain why that's a problem up until the midpoint of the movie when it finally happens, because that turns a Toon into a human, which is an interesting thing, I'm not going to lie. But that also, for some reason, can lead to the ripping of fabric and space-time between the two realities that would turn everything into Toon real. I don't even know. So basically, then Hollywood, it's been a plot all along that she wants to become a real person to go to the real world and go to the specific tower in Las Vegas. I think my body's reacting poorly to how ridiculous this plot is.
It's trying to reject it.
Yeah, so she would go to this tower where, I don't know, she would become like an immortal or something. I can't even really remember now. But she does that, but then also like kills Detective Brad Pitt in the process. Spoiler alert. And it fails because Jack Teebs, I think, turns into a superhero. I think that's where I started to dissociate because things were just getting so odd. And then the movie ends where everybody lives happily ever after, I guess. And oh, by the way, Detective Brad Pitt finally gets to doink his cartoon girlfriend because they're both cartoons now.
Okay, so I think we watched basically the same movie.
Okay.
But I have way more questions. Way more questions because I followed it like this. We have Brad Pitt comes home, dies, gets sucked into the cartoon world. Got that? Cool. We leave him completely for about 45 minutes of the movie to go have another beginning where Jack Deeb's in prison for murdering his wife. He draws Cool World, wants to doink Hollywood. Got it? Cool. Leaves, finds out, then we find out he's like the most famous underground comic book artist of all time, and then gets sucked into Cool World so Hollywood can boink him. Again, the rules as to like, oh, humans can't boink cartoons, but I'm like, Brad Pitt's the only human in Cool World. How would you know this? Wait, why do you know this? Has he? What? Okay, confused. And then Jack Deebs boinks Hollywood. Hollywood becomes Kim Basinger. Then she wants to go boink everything in the real world. And then they start turning into weird cartoon human thingies flashing in between. And then the giant spire, really bad camera work. And then it releases cartoon chaos onto the world. And then, yeah, Jack Deebs turns into Superman. Saves him. Brad Pitt dies. Comes back because there's a new rule that was not introduced until just for the last scene of the movie, so he can come back to life and boink his girlfriend.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So we watched the same movie, but again, why? All right? There's a lot of why going on.
Yeah. Well, okay, so here's something I think I'll bring up at the end of this segment of the podcast. Just as like let's try and fix this real quick before we move on. Do you think there's two competing stories that are going on here that could have worked really well as one story would have worked versus having both, and the other story would have been a really good prequel? Because I think that Jack Deeb's story should have stayed the main story, in that we would have had a really good story if it was just tortured comic book artist finds himself in the world he created after dissociating because of the guilt for murdering his wife, and then that becomes a story about the tortured artist. Then Brad Pitt being with the character in the Toon World that is like part of his crazy fantasy reality, whatever. That's the prequel, because then you could see he's the story about the first human ever to cross into Toon World or whatever.
I honestly would have preferred it if Brad Pitt's character did not exist at all. He serves no point in the story.
Yeah, frankly.
Like, let's be honest. He is there at the beginning. He's the character like we think is the main character, but really he's not really the main character. Jack Deebs is the one who's like doing things in the world, changing things, whatever. And his story's a lot more interesting.
Yeah.
He is the tortured artist, goes into the world, and all the cool shit happens. But okay. Do you want to know the original plot to this that Ralph Bakshi pitched to the studio?
Yes, because I'm also surprised that the Ralph Bakshi creation is this bad, and that I have a theory on why it ended up being the way it did. But let's get this original plot before we get into that.
Okay, so from everywhere I can find, this is more or less the original plot. It was supposed to be a live action animation hybrid film like this, and it was all supposed to be a horror film.
Oh.
Big thing, where a human and a cartoon have sex and a child is born, and the human abandons it and goes back to the real world. And the cartoon child, or the half human, half cartoon child, grows up and then travels to the human world to try and kill his father for revenge. That is the basic like pitch plot summary that was given, that was originally greenlit.
Interesting.
Yes.
Because that sounds exactly like a Ralph Bakshi story, because it sounds terrifying.
Yeah.
It sounds interesting. I would watch that, but I still think there's something serviceable about what they ended up with, because what happened here is that they greenlight a picture because Who Framed Roger Rabbit was a success. then more and more...
They want to cash in on it.
Yeah, exactly, which is fair. I mean, it's all fair in love and war and cinema. But yeah, I feel like Brad Pitt's character was definitely an afterthought because they were like, well, we don't know how marketable this will be if it's not a kids movie and a noir film for some reason. Because I totally was... It's certainly like... How would I put this? And we'll get to this in the second half, but I wondered why a noir film was the first choice for Who Framed Roger Rabbit as well. Even though it's totally necessary for the specific story they came up with. Part of me was like, is there no other genre we could have tried first? But, again, they couldn't have done it any other way because Who Framed Roger Rabbit is, even based on the title, specifically going to be something about that. But I don't know. It's fascinating to me because you're right. I do think that Brad Pitt was not originally ever supposed to be anywhere near this.
Yeah. And I mentioned this earlier that Kim Basinger made a huge thing for the studio was, hey, since this is an animated film, I want this to be a certain way so I can show this to sick kids in hospitals.
Which is, by the way,
it's a noble thing, but that's not what this movie is.
Well, it's just like,
right?
okay, Kim, we get it. You're trying to signal blast here. I'm going to show my movie to sick kids in hospitals. Well, doesn't everybody? Come on.
Yeah. So, and I really want to make sure that I'm not just blowing smoke here.
Yeah, it's not because no games of telephone.
Right. So, yeah, here it is. This is the actual quote I found. So, during a meeting mid-production, this is midway through the movie. Kim Basinger told Ralph Bakshi and Frank Mancuso Jr., the producer of the film, that this would be wonderful if she could show this movie to sick kids in hospitals. Bakshi replied, Kim, I think that's wonderful, but you've got the wrong guy to do that with. Why don't you tell me that on the way in? How are you telling me this halfway through the picture? Mancuso, the producer, actually agreed with Basinger and thought it was a good idea. So halfway through the production, the tone, the objective, whatever of the film shifted. That is probably explains why it feels so disjointed. Right?
I feel so bad for Ralph Bakshi. I really feel bad for him.
And this is his last theatrical film. This is the last full-length feature film he's ever made.
Yeah.
And also, apparently, Brad Pitt's character was original to the film. He was an original character. Jack Dees was an original character.
Oh.
And Hollywood. They were all original characters to the story. So now I'm wondering, where did the change happen and what scenes changed? What got cut?
Yeah,
right?
A lot about this. Because here's the thing I don't understand a lot about the whole...
There's only one thing?
Yeah, there's a lot. Because this movie is filthy. Full of adult situations, let alone...
The whole objective is Hollywood trying to get some human dong. That's the objective of the movie.
Yeah. On top of others, I might add.
Dick is the MacGuffin.
On top of the fact that this is... other characters in the film are completely inappropriate in the way that they handle sex and relationships. Which I'm not saying Ralph Bakshi is the beacon of how we should be looking to those things. He's the furthest from it. But... yeah, he paints an urban setting in which all of the characters within it are horrible, horrible people.
Yeah. Oh, God, yes.
By the way, this is the thing you're showing to the kid who's currently on life support. This is the world they're missing out on.
And it's also a thing where the movie... I don't understand the point of it anymore. Right?
I think
what's the objective of the film? Is it supposed to be because I think the teeth of this movie got cut out.
Oh, certainly.
Where I don't know if it's an objective of be careful, like, be careful who your sexual partners are, or be careful about, like, worship of somebody. I don't understand what's the moral, the theme, the objective. It's all over the place. Did it get lost in translation? Did all that shit get cut out?
I think so, because Ralph Bakshi, he's not a tight storyteller. That's for sure. But at the very least, there are certain things that he says in his movies, and a lot of them just really have to do with counterculture. In my mind, that's what you could boil it down to. Fritz the Cat being that perfect example of pretty much what Fritz the Cat is just a beatnik becoming a hippie. I mean, that's all the movie ends up really being, and it's all a whole process of, like, losing your innocence, albeit in a very vulgar way.
Yeah.
But, this movie as well, I think part of what it is just kind of like this exploration of fantasy and desires and kind of those feelings that come out with that. But it does get lost in this odd, what ended up trying to be a blockbuster when it really should have just been like a Hitchcock movie, It's like, I don't know.
It's strange because I feel that's what Paramount was aiming for, and Basky was aiming for something totally different. Paramount wanted Who Framed Roger Rabbit 2. They wanted the same thing as Who Framed Roger Rabbit. They wanted, like, I want this to at least double, if not triple, its budget. I want it to, be something we can market for forever. We want Who Framed Roger Rabbit 2. Basky's like, I want to make basically a animated art film for, like, not a lot of money. It might make its budget back, and that's it. But I want to make an animated art film. I just need a lot more money to do it.
Yeah.
And then shit happened.
Kind of. Kind of the interesting thing, going back to what you saying that this is Bakshi's, like, last theatrical run. If you look back at his career too, he has pretty much the career of any other, like, up and coming director. He makes his initial film. That's a huge, well, at least cultural success, if not financial success, because I don't know what the financials on Fritz the Cat were. But then he gets to make a few more that are of his own style that, get more and more popularity maybe. And then he finally gets the blockbuster, Lord of the Rings, which is like a lot of directors that we come in, like one Taika Waititi, who makes a few of his more personal films. He gets the Marvel film. And then I feel like this is that, okay, now I'm going to go out and make Jojo Rabbit. Now I'm going to go out and make the film that is totally my thing, but I can do it on the scale I've always wanted to.
Yeah.
And unfortunately,
I finally have the money to tell the story.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is that scary next step that sometimes does not go its way, that I think, thankfully, studios have gotten better at handling. That maybe they finally realized, let's just let them go. Let's just let them do their thing, because I think if Ralph Bakshi would have done his thing, based on Dean's description, we probably could have watched an interesting film this week. It still probably wouldn't have topped Who Framed Roger Rabbit because of what it is, but I don't know, that horror film aspect of it fascinates me. That I don't know.
Yeah, and for those wondering, I went and I looked at the budgets and how much his movies actually made, because I'm thinking, like, how is this guy's career spanned? And apparently his movies have always made money. Like, Fritz the Cat actually only cost him like $100,000, $200,000, and it was an underground film. It was the first X-rated animated film, and I think the only X-rated animated film. I speak
X-rated
anime. Yes, take that, Japan. And yeah, but it made its budget back. Lord of the Rings actually made it cost them $4 million to make. It made like $40 million.
Yeah, it's Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
in 1978, by the way, when everybody was like high and all into Middle Earth,
into that shit. Yeah, so his movies made money. I mean, they were provocative, whatever. But do you think it's just like in '92 we just moved past that? Like, do you think his shtick was over, or do you think he just was not able to express it in this film, and we're not really seeing Bakshi at his best?
I think it's 6 in one and half a dozen in another. I mean, I feel like there's a part of it where the culture, probably wasn't all there. Because in 1992, you're getting to the point where, like, MTV and, Beavis and Butthead, it's like kids are just growing up filthy and loudmouthed by that point, where everything's inappropriate and nothing matters. Whereas in, like, 1978 and earlier, America still had a sense of, like, decency that they were trying to abide by, and the nuclear family, and Bakshi was the exact opposite, so that probably helped him along. But I think most of it, based on what we discussed, is studio involvement. And unfortunately, one person's selfish desire to be, for some reason, the hero to kids in hospitals, which that's the most offensive
baffles
part.
Your mind.
That's the most offensive part of this film. That's what I find most offensive anyway.
Yeah, it's just so strange because back to the movie proper, right? I think there's stuff going on in the movie that it's like visually interesting, and there's things going on that I'm like, the production on this in some aspects look really good. Like when Hollywood is actually doing the dancing, and David, you made a comment that's rotoscoped. Like that's actually like Kim Basinger or somebody's like doing the dance moves and then they're animating over it. And those sequences look really good. They're really stunning. Like the animation, the fluidity, what they're drawing around it, all the things that are going on is really cool. And some aspects where Brad Pitt's interacting with the animated world, and there's aspects of this movie that are really interesting, but the story falls apart immediately. And also, like, I need to talk about the actors involved, because I know you love Brad Pitt, but would you even say Brad Pitt is phoning it in, or is he just literally reading the script before he walks on camera?
I actually thought of this while watching the movie. I don't know if he's phoning it in. He's a young Brad Pitt, so he might also not quite, this might be the minor leagues for him at this point. But I also feel like one thing I noticed was I wondered if the actors were actually acting before the animation was done, so they don't even really know what they're reacting to, which makes it that much harder for them to put on a realistic performance. Because think about it, I mean, they can't animate it before the performance, so they'd have to animate it after, so that the animators know what they're drawing on. And then the actors sitting there like, well, I don't even have a tennis ball here to react to. It's like, come on.
Yeah, and this is another thing, because this is 92, so this is like 2-3 years before he does 7 and 12 Monkeys that basically broke him as an actor. And I want to say this is his first like leading man role. I want to say that this is his. People were like, oh, you're going to be the leading man in this new Paramount movie. I would be embarrassed if this was my first leading role.
Well, I will say one thing, in that I wouldn't be so much embarrassed as Brad Pitt, because it's not like over the top bad. I still think that he's one of the most handsome devils in this movie. So I mean, at the very least, I'd be like, they looked pretty damn good. But I would say at the very least, I'm glad it was probably before I got famous, because I think. Let me see here. He was on an episode of 21 Jump Street. Then there's a couple movie appearances. He had that bit part in Thelma and Louise. I think this is his first. Or no, he's the leading man in a movie in 1991, Johnny Suede, which I would love to know what that is.
Yes, of course you would.
Yeah, but after that, it all gets good for him.
But yeah, that's what I guess that's the thing that you made a good point of, is you're probably right. These guys were probably acting across from nothing. There's probably nobody else in the room except the director and the crew telling them, this is vaguely what you're looking at, and it's going to vaguely be in this direction. Go and act, actor boy. Which really informs why the performances seem so weird. which makes it kind of hard for me to understand, because if Kim Basinger is rotoscoped in some scenes but not others, that just makes it really awkward when they're interacting with each other. I don't know. It's weird. This is a weird fucking movie.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's also weird to think about the fact that Brad Pitt, just 3 years later on from this, would go on to be in 7 in 12 Monkeys. So,
yes,
go figure.
And we've gone on that 12 Monkeys is what started your love affair with Brad Pitt on this show.
Yeah, because this
he's
is
real good in that movie.
It's not even one of his good like side character performances either. I mean, he's a good leading guy, don't get me wrong, but his character performances are really what will make anybody fall in love with this man because of the talent, the raw talent. But you know what the other film in this pairing has, aside from raw talent? A serviceable story. So why don't we get this show on the road and move on to that fantastic thing? Who Framed Roger Rabbit will be coming up next.
Right after this.
Dean, I found a great way for us to do something cool and to make a little money on the side.
Great. I've been looking for a new place to put my money. What do you got?
No investment needed. In fact, it's super easy, and there's creation tools we can use to record our podcast right from the phone or computer.
Wait, why would you record a podcast on your phone? You want? No, never mind. Where do I put my money for this?
I don't need any of your money. We can even get our podcast distributed to big streaming platforms like Spotify and Google Podcasts.
Oh, I get it now. We're talking big business here, okay? So you're going to need a lot of money from me. How much money are we talking here?
No, definitely don't need any of your money. In fact, we can make money from the podcast with no minimum listenership.
Okay. Now I think I'm getting what you're going at here. We need to spend money to make money, so we're talking some big gains here. Big gains.
No, definitely no. I don't need any of your money. Just all we need to make a podcast right in one place.
Okay. So what you're telling me is that you're gonna need a pretty big check from me for this podcast. So do I just make it out to cash? Because it's no problem for me. I'll just write it up right now.
No, listen, Dean, just head over to anchor.fm and check it out. You'll see why Anchor is the best place for us to record, edit, and distribute our podcasts. And I definitely do not need any of your money.
Shut up and take my money. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the second half of our double feature for this evening. Coming in as the second part is Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And here to talk about it is David and Dean.
Well,
David, we finally got good things in the world, and it's a rabbit, a cartoon rabbit.
Yeah, lovely little cartoon rabbit. I mean, what's not to love about Who Framed Roger Rabbit? They literally made a riot out of it. A thoroughly creative movie from the brilliant mind of Robert Zemeckis, and then backed by a studio that, at a time when they were probably struggling and couldn't really do anything about it, actually let their IP mingle with other studios. I mean, what a fascinating collage. I mean, I don't even know where to begin.
Well, I'm not even really sure where we could begin, because I think I found something out about you. You don't know this is an adaptation of a book, do you?
No, I actually do. I've never read this book. I know it is an adaptation of Who Censored Roger Rabbit, which is interesting. I mean, listen, I will say that basically all I did know is that it said that on Google. I don't know much about the book. I've, like I said, never read the book. But to even just the casual viewer who was watching this movie, they would have never known that. And I think that was, when I was a kid, one of the most interesting things, because you get to see things like Donald Duck and Daffy Duck going at it and dueling pianos. I mean, it's every kid's wildest dream and imagination to see these things happening on screen.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because I don't know who sold their soul to Disney and who like offered up their firstborn child to Warner Bros. To get them both on screen at the same time. But I did find out that if you wanted like Mickey Mouse on screen, he had to have equal screen time as Bugs Bunny. That's why if they're ever in shot together, they're in two shots, which is really weird but interesting. But yeah, so the production of this movie is fucking insane, right? I think we already went over this, that Robert Zemeckis read the book, wanted to get this made, and kind of wanted to lighten the tone, make it a little bit better, and no one wanted to fucking touch it. Touchstone finally takes a shot on it. They give him $70 million. This happens after, I don't know how long the production was for this film was. I think it took them like 2 years to make it.
Good question. Let's go see. Radio silence. So let's see here. Silence. Based on some quick reading of a Wikipedia article, so excuse me, but there's several sections that have to do with development, casting, and writing. So that's already telling you that this went through, like Dean said, some development hell. It is interesting here because like they say here, several bits of the plot are inspired by things like famous movies like Chinatown, but also more realistic depictions of the local area in Los Angeles because it's a noir film. Of course, you're going to have some sort of infrastructure plot going on inside of it.
Yeah.
The filming, it says here, animation director Richard Williams admitted he was openly disdainful of the Disney bureaucracy and refused to work in Los Angeles. To accommodate him and his animators, production moved to England, where a studio, Walt Disney Animation UK, located at the Forum, blah, 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 blah. So it basically seems like that everybody hated working with each other. Filming began on November 2nd, 1986, and lasted for 7.5 months. That's pretty long.
Yeah, I think, what is it, Seven Samurai took, I heard this, it took 150 days to film. Or 150 days to make the movie of Seven Samurai. And you're saying 7.5 months? This basically took the same amount of time.
That's like the average amount of time of a Stanley Kubrick movie.
Big yikes. Okay. So, which is weird because Cool World, from what I understand, other than the hiccup mid-production of the giant, like, left turn it took, had a very relatively smooth production. People got along making film. But this is like should have been a total disaster. And it wasn't. Everything just worked out way better. So where do you want to get started here? Because this is a noir film. This is a kids friendly animated film. It pays homage to all these different like aspects of filmmaking and cartooning, and it had a little bit of production hell. Do you want to get started on the plot, the characters, the design? Where are we going with this?
Well, I think we get to get started with the plot to kind of get through what we're looking at here. Like I said, this is a noir film kind of inspired by a lot of Hollywood famous lore and everything, because of course you will do that when kind of making a hodgepodge movie. There's our detective, who's our hero. It's Detective Val.
Eddie Valiant.
Yeah, Valiant.
Eddie Valiant.
Which is, pretty general name. There's a lot of that going on in this movie for sure. So Eddie Valiant, his brother has been killed by a tune, and of course that makes him a drunkard, because of course you are when your brother dies. But he's hired by the biggest studio exec in town, who owns this Maroon Cartoon Studios that just happens to have the biggest star in town, Roger Rabbit. There's apparently some tomfoolery going on between Roger Rabbit and his wife, and a suspected adultery plot by the guy who owns the club that she sings at. So we're sent down to go take some photos, see what's going on there. There's some patty cake. And then we kind of get this interesting, classic layered story of a detective who steps into a simple thing that they think they're above, then into a murder plot that they're certainly equipped and qualified for, which, as they soon begin to learn that the world is still scary and they're not sure if they're ready to tackle it again, becomes an even bigger plot about infrastructure and government.
And a huge fucking conspiracy.
Oh, yeah, to commit genocide, by the way.
Yes. And which is a fascinating thing, because I described this to my brother because I was talking to him on we were going to get food. I was like, "Hey, I just finished watching Who Framed Roger Rabbit," and he's like, "Oh yeah, how was it?" And I told him I basically just watched Chinatown, but half the characters are cartoons. Am I off base? Does this feel basically like Chinatown?
Well, yeah, I mean, in that Wikipedia article, I can't remember if I mentioned it, but the Cloverleaf streetcar subplot was inspired by Chinatown, apparently, in the writing of the script or book, because I don't really know what the book is and isn't.
Well, I have a understanding of the book. I read a chunk of it a long time ago, and I refreshed my memory a little bit before this, and it is fascinating. The whole plot thing going on with, the Cloverfield and the freeway, that I don't really remember, but what is a thing is there's a murder plot. Somebody kills the club owner. And what's going on is Eddie's trying to discover who did it and clear Roger Rabbit's name. And when he does clear his name, he finds out that Roger actually killed a guy. Roger actually murdered the club owner, and also Roger's dead. Roger died in the book. Because cartoons have an ability to clone themselves, but the clones only last for so long. And so Roger kills a guy, and then Roger dies. So then the clone of Roger has to solve his own murder, and yeah, basically the plot of the book is very convoluted and strange, but it's a fascinating read.
Yeah, I see the book cover here on Wikipedia, and it looks quite dark and odd.
Yeah.
From the mind of Gary K. Wolfe, who will go on to write more Roger Rabbit stories, as it seems. But yeah, so the whole thing is. A lot of noir stories end up being like this, right? Where there's a little bit, and then there's just enough like it was before the tragedy, and then it devolves into a huge thing, because in order to get back to normalcy, you need to be able to conquer anything. And that, I think, is great about this story, because it does it masterfully, first of all, on top of this fully fleshed out and wildly interesting world that equally has enough stakes and obstacles in order to make this story better for not just kids. I mean, when you really think about it, the kids are going to get into it because, oh no, the tunes are going to go away. But when you think about it as an adult, you're like, yeah, well, that is how scary the world is. So, it certainly doesn't shy away from that. And I think that it helps a lot.
This is also probably, in terms of kid film genre stuff, this is probably, baby's first noir film, right? This is probably like the first noir film most kids would have seen, not realizing it was a noir film.
Or I would even go on to say that, because this film isn't necessarily just G-rated, it gets away with some PG and PG-13-ish, more like PG-12 jokes. There's a few cuss words here and there. So I really feel like it's not even baby's first noir film. It's more like baby's first adult film. That's probably a bad way to put it. This is baby's first grown-up film. Is probably a better way to phrase it.
Way better way to phrase it.
Baby's first.
The last guy who directed actual X-rated movies.
Yeah, baby's first adult film is actually a Ralph Bakshi picture. But moving on. That's kind of the interesting thing about this, because I would say most of the second act is really fairly just a kid's film. It's the setup and kind of payoff is, I think, where we get most of the more mature bits. But they do, the thing that, again, fascinates me and that Cool World tried but failed miserably at, They flesh out everything that you can think of when it comes to cartoons, but they do that while also having the backing of the literal most famous cast of cartoons that we all loved as children. So it's not just like it's not just like parody, I guess is how I would put it. It's not just like a satire of what we all think about cartoons. It's literally a deconstruction of the things that we watched as children, which is fascinating.
Yeah, and I don't know if I want to say it's like a deconstruction. It's almost a love letter into a certain sense. Because I don't know. I might just start rambling, but I'm going to try not to, because I know people fucking hate that. But, so in this movie, I think a lot of the big things that I really attach onto is like the characters and the performances here. Because Bob Hoskins is playing the most generic down on his luck drunk detective, and it's perfect. And it's like a perfect performance. I'm really surprised he didn't get more roles as a just down on his luck detective into more shit. I guess it might have been a thing where, that era of Hollywood disappeared decades before.
Yeah, I do feel like at the very least what's going on here is that he doesn't need to be wildly transformed because the story in the world itself is. Like, the premise is really what people are coming to the movie for. Bob Hoskins just needs to do his job. But the thankful, wonderful thing about that is that when he does his job, it makes the movie that much better. Because all we really need is a hero to root for, and that's exactly what we get out of Bob. On top of the fact that, too, I think it's one of those things where it's how many more ways can you really spin this sort of thing? I don't think the movie's so much about spinning noir and kind of finding new ways to do noir. It just ends up being that, like, well, A, that's what the original book was kind of about, but two, it's like the perfect backdrop for analyzing Hollywood, because Hollywood in LA, where LA has a long history of exactly what Chinatown goes through, on top of the fact that Tinseltown in itself is scandalous and we're dealing with celebrity, it just kind of all comes together in the perfect soup.
Yeah. And okay, you talked about the world a second ago, and I got a question for you. So the world in this is fascinating, right? And that's kind of what the movie's hanging its hat on, in that we have these cartoon celebrities, and there's this whole like cartoon section of Los Angeles that the cartoons live in, and all the other things. Cartoons exist differently than humans. I think they say that they're basically impervious to like harm. They don't die traditionally. Now, if this was a normal noir film, like if they took out the cartoon element and just changed it with, these are like just regular Hollywood actors, and maybe Toon World is like, I don't know, Beverly Hills or just another part of LA, would this be the most generic noir film?
It would just be watered down Chinatown. I mean,
right?
If you want to go back to it, because what made Chinatown so interesting, and we'll get to it later this year, is that it's morbid and kind of sick and twisted. But that's the point of the movie. Like, it's not just about being a generic noir film. It's about taking that noir film and saying, well, it's not all sunshine and sunlight out here in Los Angeles. There's sick and twisted things going on in the mind of Roman Polanski. But
no shit.
Yeah, who would have thought? I mean, based on what happened.
Roman Polanski. Yeah.
But I think that's kind of the thing of it too. Is like, well, if we want to be marketable to 11-year-olds, we probably shouldn't put a molestation and a what's the word for it when you're sleeping with your own family?
Incest?
Yeah, that's what it is. Incestually molestation plot. I don't know. It's dark and fucked up, which is probably not what 12-year-olds want to watch.
You would think, yeah.
Well, they might want to in 1992, where they will get Cool World, but that's neither here nor there. I just think it's like Zemeckis. It's like, he's responsible for Back to the Future. He gets what stories need. Back to the Future is like a wildly complicated story, but it just banks on having like an interesting premise. He could get a lot more fucked up and wild and crazy with Back to the Future. I mean, he practically almost takes a coin from Roman Polanski in that one, but
there is a moment where Marty's mom tries to boink him, and it gets really awkward.
But I think that actually,
again, there's a thing.
That's kind of an interesting key to what I think the genius of Robert Zemeckis is. While it is a little weird, that of course would come up when you're faced with, oh, I've landed in the town that my mom and dad were in when they were teenagers, but they don't know I'm their son. So yeah, if I'm, like a handsome kid, of course there might be something going on there, especially when I've fucked up and put myself in the situation that got them romantically involved when they were teenagers. It's not really because he wants to be that weird. It just is you ask the right questions and you find the right plot points, which is exactly what happens in Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Yeah, and I want to say Who Framed Roger Rabbit is just a fascinating exercise in premise plus story equals just a good film.
Yeah.
Because this is a good film. I would say this is a really good film across the board. But it has things where it's like the characters are generally cookie cutter. They're cut out of the traditional cloth of things we've seen before. The plot is more or less cut from things we've seen before. But then the overall premise of, well, here's the twist. Cartoons are real. And there's a whole like cartoon world just on the other side of the 5 freeway. And that's where it transforms it into something better than what it really is. It's a fascinating little movie to watch because it's a way better flick than the sum of it. Like the sum of its parts add up to a better film.
I agree. I mean, I think there's an interesting thing in describing the story there too, beyond just like you have these cookie cutter characters where, yeah, it's like Bob Hoskins plays like a generic detective, and Roger Rabbit really is just a caricature of any famous studio cartoon. I mean, you plug Mickey Mouse in that spot, or you plug opposite of him Bugs Bunny in that spot, who probably would fit a lot more, and technically probably is the one they're copying. You would have pretty much the same flick because they're both would have character flaws that feed into the same thing that would, yada yada yada. But I think more of what it is that Hoskins and Roger Rabbit connect on such like a level that makes them a charismatic pair throughout the movie, which is fueled also by the conflict in the movie. Like you said, the premise and the story adds up to a whole thing, because when you think about it, like a good example is Rocky, right? Rocky is nothing more than just a boxer trying to win a boxing match. That's all the story is.
Yeah.
But it's not just about the boxer trying to win the boxing match. It's also about the love story that goes on in between, which I have personal opinions about. But that's why everybody goes back to that movie, is for the bit with Adrian, not the bit with him punching a slab of meat. Although it's pretty cool.
Yeah. And I guess that Rocky's a good comparison, because I love that movie. Rocky's one of those movies where it's, it's a story of a schmuck who doesn't want to be a schmuck anymore, and how he tries to get that, and the things he finds on the way, and a questionable love story that would probably not play well in 2021.
Yeah.
But we'll get back to that. Once we get to Rocky, we'll get back to it. But then back to the film. It's just a fascinating story that plays out in a fascinating way, and it works well. And it also has the scariest villain of anyone's childhood, Judge Doom, played by Christopher Lloyd. So, when you watch this film, David, I assumed you also watched this as a child, like as a kid. You've seen this?
Yeah, a little later in my childhood, but yeah, I saw it as a kid.
When you saw this today, or as an adult, and you saw Judge Doom, Christopher Lloyd, turn into, crazy, evil guy, did you wet yourself like I did? Because I was terrified. I'm memeing, but like for a second there, I was like, I had that ting in my chest where I'm like, oh shit, this is hitting one of those nerves from childhood of a thing I used to be afraid of, but I'm not anymore. But that primal instinct of fuck this, I'm out, is still there. Is that camping with you or not?
I've experienced it in other movies. Like I said, I was probably a little late in my childhood to be like thoroughly enthralled by the villainy that is Mr. Doom here.
Judge Doom.
Yeah, Judge Doom. I don't know why I forgot that it was a judge. His honorable presiding. Especially because I think I saw Back to the Future first before this. So my idea of Christopher Lloyd, though, again, I probably wasn't thinking Christopher Lloyd at the time. I was just like, I recognize that guy, and he's the wacky professor from that other movie. Is preceded by this other thing, but I do think that Lloyd is the perfect person to then become kind of this perfect villain for this movie, which is also helped along by, again, if you're a kid and thinking about the erasure of all cartoons from existence is a pretty terrifying stake. I don't know. I mean, like, you know, he reminds me a lot of, like I feel like this is what Jim Carrey would have been a few years earlier. Like, Jim Carrey could be the very charismatic, silly person in one movie. And though, again, it's probably not a perfect comparison because I wouldn't compare it to this. He can also play the villain like he has recently in some live action mixed with animation movies like Sonic the Hedgehog. Not a good comparison at all, but I think that he has that versatility that would, you know, I mean, I don't need to go out and qualify the resume of Christopher Lloyd. He's one of the greats. But
I have gone on record that I think Christopher Lloyd is probably my favorite actor from my childhood that still stands up as a great actor as an adult.
Yeah, I agree.
Right, there's some actors you remember as a kid that you really, really liked, but you watch them now and you're like, they were okay. Christopher Lloyd's a great actor from a kid and a great actor now, and he's a great guy.
Who, by the way, has been the same white-haired old man for I don't know how long.
I think he was born like in his mid-60s with pure white hair. I think that's a thing. Because I've never seen the man young.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I saw him in Clue, and he still looked like an old man.
Yeah, honestly. I mean, this movie came out in 1988, and he looks 82 like he is currently. I don't know. I mean, somebody, either he found the fountain of youth just a little too late and is stuck in this kind of stasis, or I'm just glad that he's still around. I don't really know.
Yeah, nah, if you want a fountain of youth, like mind blow, look up Keir Dullea. Keir Dullea. He's the guy from 2001: A Space Odyssey, and it looks like he just put on a gray beard and whitened his hair. He has not aged a day since 1968.
Fascinating.
It's creepy. Yeah, but that's a whole other thing we're getting to get on later.
Yeah.
But yeah, do you have anything else you want to say about Who Framed Roger Rabbit before we get to the little wrap-up section here?
Well, like I said, thoroughly enthralling. Everybody, we probably should briefly mention the elephant in the room, especially because we mentioned it in the other one, that Jessica Rabbit is everybody's, childhood heartthrob. Fine, although she's like Dean and I were kind of stating it for the show. It's saying something that Ralph Bakshi's leading cartoon lady is more realistic than Jessica Rabbit, but
I will go on record that I have never in my life found Jessica Rabbit attractive in any sense. I don't know why, just doesn't do anything. Whereas like at least Hollywood looks like a real like caricature of a human. I could see why like Jack Deeves would be kind of attracted to that. I don't see why.
That is what a man against the law in Cool World would say. You, sir, are about to be investigated by Brad Pitt.
You wish you could be investigated by Brad Pitt.
I really do. I wish he would dig deep into my files.
So we've discovered that it's like, cartoons are cool, but David really wants some Brad Pitt action.
Hey, I think everybody would.
All right. But yeah, so there's the elephant in the room. Jessica Rabbit, hot take, not as hot as you think.
Not as hot as Brad Pitt, that's for sure. Well, so, I mean, let's discussion time, I guess.
Yeah, so now we've gotten to the end of this little double feature. Now we got the two of them to look at.
Yeah.
So I guess the first thing, the little pretentious hat moment going on, because these two films do something very similar. They both take points from noir films. They both try to meld live action and animation. One of them takes place majority in the animated world. One takes place the majority in the real world. And my question to you, Monsieur David, is do you think the melding of live action and animation worked better to tell the story? Like, was it necessary for the stories they were trying to tell? Or could they have done it the same in purely live action or in purely animation?
Well, I think they're necessary singly because what both movies are trying to do is capitalize on a gimmick. I mean, that's really what we're looking at here, is two movies who are using a cinematic gimmick that, no different from like a monster movie, 3D, any of these. It's like, that's what really these are, and it's just unfortunate, or fortunate, that the studios did what they did with these. Who Framed Roger Rabbit was a thoroughly creative, first of its kind of creation that did exactly what they should have done with this. And it results in a fantastic box office showing. Opposite of that, Cool World is not that. And unfortunately, partially due to some involvement that normally tanks a lot of these projects. I mean, I think it totally could have done something fascinating if it was allowed to be what it was originally intended to be. But do I think that it still holds some water and deserves to be what it is? Yeah, because I think it does certain things that Who Framed Roger... Like, certain things happen in Cool World that don't happen in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And while, to varying degrees of execution, they're not going to be one-for-one comparable, Cool World is still unique in its own way, and I was glad that I experienced it by the end of it. Ralph Bakshi, I'm glad he at least got to attempt something like this, because his animation style is one of a kind and will, for generations to come, be somewhat, or if not more than, an inspiration to a lot of animators. So I don't know. It's fascinating.
Okay, then I guess like an evolution on that question, because you mentioned it, they both went through a developmental hell, where Who Framed Roger Rabbit, literally no one wanted to work on the picture. It dragged through for years. Basically, it was pulling teeth to get it made, whereas Cool World was pretty easy to get the green lit, but then really hard to actually get made because it had to take that left turn in the middle. I don't even know where I was going with that. I think I was just gonna say like Cool World fucking sucks, but whatever. That was basically my point. Cool World fucking sucks. All right, it's absolute hot garbage. So there you go. Now, David, I guess the quantifying question, the actual next question is, which is a better movie, purely a better movie, and then which is the one somebody should watch?
Well, I think kind of an answer and a callback to I think what you were trying to say, because I kind of followed what you were going for there. Who Framed Roger Rabbit is obviously the one that you should both go to for a watch, and then by the end of it realize it is the better movie of the two. I mean, Cool World, if anything else, is probably just fodder for us to dump on it. But, it's one that, if you're interested in this type of thing, go watch it, because it's fascinating to experience, like I said, in that I think what you were going for there was that Roger Rabbit was like a hook, line, and sinker slam dunk when you really put it together. If the movie, or if the script was even half what the final cut was, then of course it was going to be a success. It's maybe just that when thinking about it, and especially thinking about something that hasn't really been done before, which I guess is not totally true because this has been done as a gimmick in things like Mary Poppins. Is probably a,
Mary Poppins is a big one. Song of the South is another one. There's a lot of stuff in early.
I don't know if they
Pete's
want to
Dragon's
talk about
another
Song
example.
of the South, but
And no one wants to talk about that movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of early Disney films of the 50s, 60s, and 70s that did this gimmick. They just didn't do it to this level.
Yeah, because like
Right.
Mary Poppins is an example. It's imaginative, but it's not the whole package. This was the whole package. This is where we're going to literally do everything that this medium that we're about to delve into needs. And it'll be serviceable by a fantastic story. But then you have all the problems of like people aren't sure, the studio isn't sure, people don't want to work with the big studio, but you need those creative people to work with the big studio to make it a great movie. And it's just like one of those things where Zemeckis, even though he had already come off of Back to the Future's wild success and continued success because it would become a franchise,
I mean, again, yeah.
who knows what really was the problem? I mean, in my mind, it's like everybody thought Star Wars was going to be a massive failure, and then it ended up being the biggest movie franchise of all time. It's, it's one of those things where hindsight is 20/20, and I think the same is true of Cool World, where it's like, had a whole lot of potential, but again, that's, I think, unfortunate because it resulted in the exact opposite result of one Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So I don't know. I mean,
I guess that's the interesting thing is one of them had probably like on paper not a whole lot of like creative like outstanding things going on, but once it's built together, oh man, yeah, that's a great movie.
Yeah.
The other one had a lot more an interesting premise, interesting things you can do with it, and it just came out as just a turd.
Yeah.
It's just a fascinating thing.
It's a fascinating, yeah. I don't know. I think, ironically, to the credit of both these movies' inspirations, history is the devil in the details here. So, chalk it up to that, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess that's where we'll chalk up these two movies. If you can only watch one, watch Roger Rabbit. But if you really need to know, you can watch Cool World just to understand what's going on. You might have seen a different movie than we did. But that is it. Now, David, next week, we're leaving the live-action animation behind. We're leaving American animation behind. We're finally going to see some animation from across the ocean. We're going to Japan. We're finally going to watch anime here on the double feature. And David, these are two flicks that you've been excited to look at. And what are those two going to be?
Yes, we are going across the ocean, like Dean said, to Japan. We're going to be watching Akira and Ghost in the Shell. This is going to be fascinating for me. My sister was a huge anime and manga person when she was a teenager and I was growing up. So I've had exposure to this genre, but I myself have never really gotten into it. But I do know that Akira itself is a kick-ass movie. And same along with that, in Ghost in the Shell is often paired with this as being like kind of two heavy hitters coming out of this genre. I don't know. I'm excited for this. I think these are going to be two action-packed films.
Yeah, these two movies are credited with exposing anime to the West. Akira literally is credited with making anime a popular thing in America enough to create a anime exporting like facility. Without Akira, we would not have gotten like Cowboy Bebop, Trigun, probably wouldn't even have gotten Pokemon. And then with Ghost in the Shell, that was basically the 1-2 punch. Ghost in the Shell then comes and shows like, hey, and you guys love anime, we can keep giving it to you, just keep buying this stuff, and it's going to be interesting. Because I've seen Akira a couple of times, but I've never seen Ghost in the Shell, so this is going to be a new experience.
Oh.
I'm very excited.
It'll be a new experience for both of these for me, so I'm also excited to get into it. I think we'll be thoroughly pleased by this pair.
And if you want to be thoroughly pleased by listening to this, David, where can they find us?
That is high of you to assume, Dean, but we thank you for our confidence boosting, and I think they should be confident about it. You can come follow us on anywhere you listen to podcasts, that being where you might be right now, Spotify, Radio Public, Overcast, I think is another way. There's tens of thousands
and
of them.
Also, Apple Podcast. We're finally accepted on Apple Podcast. I checked it today.
Oh, really? I didn't even know
Yeah.
that. Well, Dean's bringing in the good news, and I think that's a great way for us to continue to get you listeners around. So thank you for coming, because there is an influx of you, and it's really great that we have some of you coming to watch our show. You can also watch us on YouTube, where we post this podcast, our kind of hobby podcast, Too Obscure for TV, as well as Dean's, he's called it our sister podcast, which I think is apt, the Film Club, which he does with his girlfriend. They do one
Yes.
film every week, in case you can't stand having us do two, or two of us. You can only get
Yes.
one of us, and probably somebody who has a lot more brains.
Yeah. Becky is, or my girlfriend. She is very much on the, the hammer of Dean. Shut up! It's just a movie. Just enjoy the ride. I'm like, Pokemon's not that good. And then she gets mad at me, but it's fun.
Well, I'm
It's a
telling
fun
you.
time.
So you can do all that, and then also follow us on social media. We have an Instagram, that being DD_Double Feature Picture Show. Follow us on TikTok. We post some extra snippets from every episode, maybe some fun little things that will get you excited for the next episode. That being Double Feature Picture Show on TikTok. And I think that's about it.
And I think that's about it for this week, everybody. Hope to see you next week at the Double Feature. Peace.
See you.